Hey everybody, in this video I'm going to be doing the Elecfreaks Microbit Starter Guide, experiment number 8, the servo motor. Now in order to get started for this, we've got a few things that we need to set up. The first thing is I've taken my servo motor out of its plastic bag, and in this small plastic bag I'm going to remove one of the little arms that are inside. Just for practical purposes, I usually take the one that's like the little half arm that's in there, and be really careful that you don't lose any of the tiny parts that come in this part of the kit. So I got that out. I'm going to close that bag up so I don't lose anything. You can see there I've got the little half arm. I'm then going to take my servo motor. I'm going to take this little hat on top and I'm going to push that down. It should have a little thing that lines up. And I've got that servo in there. And anytime you're working with a servo, please avoid trying to force it and turn it back and forth. We've got plastic gears are inside and you can accidentally strip some of those gears. So please don't ever force the servo motor. All right, once I've got that little hat on there, and if you want it to stay permanently, the tiny little screw in the package is the one that usually goes on top of there, and the two larger screws are the ones that go on the sides if you're like to mount that to a piece of wood or something. After that, I've got this connector cable that I want to plug in. So I've got 3 jumper cables here. I'm going to plug the red into the red one, which in this case is the sender wire. I'm going to plug, and sometimes they go in nicely, sometimes they stick out a little like that. As long as it makes contact, it's okay if it sticks out a little. Then I'm going to plug my orange into the orange one. All right, it looks like these are sticking out a little. And then I'm going to plug either a black or brown wire into my brown wire, which is the ground that we have on this. So brown wire or black, and plug that in. And make sure it's in this nice and snug. These ones seem to stick out a little bit, but I can tell that they're making good contact so the servo motor can conduct electricity. All right, the other thing they show in the manual is this battery pack. Now, this battery pack is a little tricky to open. If you look on one side, there's a little flap down there. Mine one has a little notch because I've opened it before. And I grabbed a little thumbtack, and I just kind of put that into the plastic down there. And I kind of force it back to get that little flap out. And once I hear a little pop, then I can open it up. I can pop in my AAA batteries. And then to get this to close again, you take the little tab at the top there. You slide that into the back first. And then you push that down so that little flap, oops, try that again. That little flap in the front clicks into place. These are a little tricky to open and close. So I have used other ones that are easier. There we go. That forced that back into place. And there we go. We got my battery pack in there. The other option on one of these, if you don't use a tack, some of these can slide out like that. But my first time, I couldn't get it to do that very well. It looks like it slides back in there now. Much nicer on my second try. So that's just a heads up on that. All right, I'm going to switch over now and let's wire this up on the breadboard. All right, so I've got everything here to wire up my servo motor. You'll notice on my breadboard, I've left in those jumper cables that I already had to share the outer rails that we've been using in the other experiments. In the manual, they don't show them there, but I'm just leaving them in place because I've looked at the rest of the experiments and they continue to use them for the rest of the projects. So looking at the wires, starting with the red wire that I have here, that red wire is going to be plugged into column 1, which hooks up to the 3 volts, and I can just put that right there in one of the empty holes. And our black wire is going to go into the G column at the bottom, or column number 1. And once again, I can just put that in one of those empty holes there. Then I have the orange wire, which is our signal pin. And they've got that going into pin number 1, I believe, in the manual. So I'm going to go to pin 1, which is column number 3, and plug that in right there. So we've got there, ground, skip a hole, pin number 1. And the top red wire, once again, is in column number 1, which is the 3-volt column. Now, currently my servo is not doing anything because I have not put any code into my make code, and I actually don't have my microbit plugged in at the moment. When you're running a single servo motor, you should be able to run it from just the USB port. Sometimes they can be a little janky, like they'll go over and they'll like hiccup and go type of thing. That's a-okay if your servo does that because these are designed to run on anything between 3 to 5 volts. That's one of the reasons why I started the battery pack, because this will supply more current and that should make the servo run a little bit better. For the servo motor itself, once again, it's okay to run this one on USB. Later on, when you're running this other motor, which is one of the final experiments in the kit, only run this one from the battery pack because this one can draw enough current that it could actually possibly damage a laptop. All right, let's head over to make code and see the code, and then we'll come back and see the servo motor in action. All right, here I am in make code. In order to use the servo motor, you're going to have to go down to the advanced features down here, and we're going to scroll down to the pins. And under pins, we're going to have this option down here at the bottom for servo right pin 0 to 180 degrees. I'm going to take that and drag that in the forever loop. I'm going to switch that to pin number 1 because we plugged our wire into column number 3, and they've got this initially set to 0. Now, one thing about the servo motors, I don't necessarily recommend setting it to 0 because when we get to the kind of the extreme part of the servo motor here, sometimes it can jitter and vibrate, and servo motors can overheat and break if we do that for too long. So I usually set that no lower than about 10 degrees. After that, we're going to give it a delay, some pause. They have the pause for 2 seconds. So I'm going to scroll down to 2 seconds there, or 2,000 milliseconds. I'm going to grab another servo right. And same thing with the 180 degrees on the other side. I'm going to have to switch this to pin number 1. And I recommend that this goes no higher than about 170. And that just prevents some of that vibrating because these are fairly inexpensive servo motors. Once again, I go down to basic. I'm going to go grab a delay or a pause here. And we're going to switch this to 2 seconds or 2,000 milliseconds. Now, if we watch on our little simulator here, we see the servo motor goes to that 10 degrees, and then it rotates back to the 180 and back to the 10 degrees again. Now, that's really good. Let's say when you're doing a robotic pet, and you want to make a robotic pet that's wagging its tail. That's pretty much all you need to do to make a wagging tail. The other option is to set this up so it can rotate when you want it to. So let's go ahead and just modify the code of it. I'm going to go to Input, and I'm going to put when button A is pressed, and I'm going to set that to the servo right pin 1 right here to 10 degrees. Then I'm going to do the same thing here with a button B. And I'm going to grab that other one that I have here, the servo right pin 1 to 170. Now when I press my A and my B button, I can control when that servo rotates back and forth. Let's try that out in the emulator. So it starts up. I'm going to press my B button. It swings to the other side. I press my A button, goes back to the left. And now I can control the servo motor to make it do different things. I'm going to upload that code to my microbit, and let's try it out to see if it works. All right, so I've got my code uploaded to my microbit. So I've got my little servo motor here. I'm going to try pressing the A button. And when I press A, I can see that servo rotates to the other side. Your one might not line up like that. If it doesn't, you can always just take the hat off. Then it just pops right off the top like that. And then you can realign it to whatever degrees you want for that starting point. I'm going to go ahead now and press the A button, so that's already done, and then press the B button. And I can see that servo motor came to the other side. And you can't see it on the camera, but I can actually feel this vibrating a little bit in my hand. So I might even change that to like a 160 or something, just so it gets rid of that vibration at the extreme ranges of the servo. So that's how we can make this little servo motor. And now we're able to make little tips that we could control. Or I could map this to like the temperature sensor, and I could make a little temperature value where it has an arm that swings and shows me the temperature in my classroom. Good luck on experiment number 8, the servo motor. One last thing, if you do want to run this on the battery pack, first thing to do is unplug your USB cable. So you don't want to have the USB and the battery pack plugged in at the same time, at least don't have the battery pack turned on. Then the battery pack has this little notch on the bottom. You want to double check and look at there to see where the notch lines up, and then you can plug in the battery pack into your microbit. Now the battery pack has a little on-off switch on it, so I'm going to switch it to the on position. And I've got my servo motor here. I'm going to try pressing A, and we can see it slides one way. Then I press B. Now it looks like it did a little bit of a jitter there. So sometimes these servo motors, because of the voltage, they'll kind of do some weird stuff like that. So sometimes they just don't respond, or it's going to take a few extra moments to respond. So that's just a heads up. There we go. So just a little bit of a personality when you're working with these servo motors. Other thing, switch the off switch. And if you do want to remove the battery pack, do not pull it from the wires, because the wires can pop out. Instead, I'm going to take the microbit out, and I grab the two sides of it. And it is actually super snug. It can be difficult to get out sometimes. So sometimes you might want to grab a little screwdriver if needed to pop it out from those edges, or a pair of pliers or something like that. All right, good luck on experiment number 8.